This is the best of First and Last, the podcast.
All right, we are live from Bristol, Connecticut, 4 a.m. here on the East Coast. I am Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr., who was on the road last night, part of the broadcast team for a bowl game. This is First and Last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We cued the music because the broadcasting world has lost a legend. Now, we throw around that word probably a little too often, but Dick Enberg, certainly worthy of that label, 82 years old, passed away last night, and the family, no official cause of death, but the family said they believed it was a heart attack. You know, many people, I'm 40, so many people my age and older certainly familiar with Dick Enberg's work over the years in terms of the marquee events, 28 Wimbledons, 10 Super Bowls, 8 NCAA men's championship games, including the legendary one in 1979, Larry Bird against Magic Johnson. It was Michigan State and Indiana State. But people younger probably know him just from tennis, maybe some Padres games. But the guy was truly a legend. The San Diego Padres issued a statement. Dick was an institution in the industry for 60 years. Think about that, 6 decades. You know, we know guys of that vintage, maybe like Brent Musburger and some others that are a little bit more mainstream. But I tell you, Dick Enberg is certainly in that category, a Hall of Fame broadcaster, no doubt, and did a bunch of TV work in Southern California, which is where I'm from, Los Angeles originally. So he had done work for UCLA Bruins, California Angels, LA Rams, before the Rams moved around and before the Angels even became the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. So Dick Enberg passed away at age 82. A broadcaster currently in Los Angeles, John Ireland, joined ESPN Radio earlier tonight. Ireland does some work for ESPN LA, does Laker games as well, went to UCLA, so has a history of just knowing the history of Dick Enberg, had this to say earlier tonight.
That you cannot at any point fake it. You know, Dick was so good at meeting the moment of energy. You know, when he would yell, "Oh my," he was at a loss for words. He didn't know, how to communicate enthusiasm, any better than that. And when he said it, you thought, "Wow, did that just happen?" I mean, I'm sure you guys will probably be digging out some of his calls tonight. And when you hear the inflection in his voice, that's something that all of us try to copy. That he just had that. I know I said it once before, but he had that genuine enthusiasm that you can't fake. And so I think that's. He was very, very good, almost natural at meeting the moment.
That's ESPN Radio's from Los Angeles, John Ireland, earlier tonight discussing Dick Enberg. I am Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr. on First and Last here at ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Dick Enberg grew up in Michigan, went to Central Michigan. His first radio job was when he was a junior at Central Michigan, earned $1 an hour. That's how long he goes back. And then he became a weekend sports and disc jockey, had some gigs also for $1 an hour. And then from there, as they say, the rest is history. But certainly called some huge events. As I mentioned, 28 Wimbledons, 10 Super Bowls, and 8 NCAA men's championship games in hoops. No doubt a legend in our industry. Dick Enberg passed away at the age of 82. Of course, we'll have much more on that throughout the course of the day right here on ESPN Radio and also on television on SportsCenter and other various programs. And he's been in movies. That's when you know you've made it. He was in The Naked Gun, and that's legit. He was with Mel Allen, so that sort of vintage. So I have fond memories being born and raised in Los Angeles, growing up, and listening to guys like Dick Enberg and just knowing sort of the historical weight guys like that carry. I'm Doug Kezirian. This is First and Last, ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. All guests join us via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line, and we will have some coming up. We're going to head out to Las Vegas. Scott Spreitzer is going to join us, have some picks for the weekend. We're also going to discuss some macro topics. I worked in Las Vegas for 7 years before coming here to ESPN, so we'll discuss some things going on out there in Las Vegas. Really a historic weekend last weekend, how sports books are getting pummeled. Yay for the public and all the bettors out there, so that's good news for them. In about an hour and change, Hembo's going to join us and give a little fantasy advice for all you in the fantasy playoffs, specifically the championship round. I am one of those in one of my leagues, so I'm psyched for that. And we're going to talk a little Daryl Morey of the Rockets basically just coming clean and saying, yeah, we're all chasing the Golden State Warriors. He joined Ryan Russillo yesterday on the Ryan Russillo show and basically had that transparent moment, which is so rare for anyone who's in the professional sports to have that kind of candor. So it was good to hear. So we'll get into all that. I'm also going to tell you why the Giants fan base overreaction to Eli Manning's benching, or actually his own benching. Remember, he benched himself before McAdoo was fired, and how that's really hurting the future. And this year's draft pick, it could be as high as number 2. So I'm going to tell you that in about, 10 minutes, maybe like 8 minutes from now. And I'll also tell you the next hour why exactly it is, I think, counterintuitive that we have performance-based incentives in sports clauses. A lot happening with week 16 and 17. If so-and-so gets 2 more sacks, they're going to make $1 million. I think it's a horrible idea. No league should do it. So we'll get into all that. But I got a dilemma here. And Devin, I need some help here. What should I do? I've been awake since noon yesterday. Did some radio yesterday afternoon. Did some work for ESPN.com, and I stayed here, and I'm hosting radio obviously now. I got to sleep all day when I get home. However, it's Christmas season. FedEx sent me an email saying my package is going to be delivered, some gifts that I ordered, and they signature required. So, there's not much, like maybe redelivery on Saturday. So what do I do?
Okay, I was just thinking about this. You know how when you're getting a package delivered, you can put on special notes for whoever's delivering it? Maybe you can put your phone number down and say, hey, I'm going to be sleeping, full disclosure. If I could get a wake-up call.
From the delivery guy, the FedEx?
I'm at the door.
But okay, so here's my ear. I mean, I have a doorbell too, but I like to sleep with my volume off and everything like blackout on. So I'm torn. I could do pickup. I could call them ahead of time and say, I'll pick it up. I'm really torn because any other day I wouldn't care. I'd just say, I'll get it tomorrow or Monday. Not a big deal, but Christmas is Monday. So that's my dilemma.
And you need a signature, you said.
Yes, that was part of the email. That's the key. That's the rub. Because other packages, they leave, and I have sort of it's a duplex, so they leave in the foyer area. It's not that big of a deal. Although, didn't we 2 years ago have a guy in the Hartford area going around stealing Christmas packages?
I feel like that happens a lot.
Yeah, and it's like they set up cameras. There's like the local news station set up a sting. So there are some evil. I mean, that's lowest. That's the lowest of low. So, maybe we can ask our listeners to chime in and let us know. Reach out on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed at ESPN Radio or myself directly at Doug ESPN. So a lot to get through the next couple hours. I'm filling in for Mike Golic Jr., who I thought was here for a moment because I was walking in the hallway and I hear his voice, but it's just the re-air of last night's bowl game. It's re-airing right now on ESPN. So it was a blowout, and he was cracking wise as Temple pounded Florida International. So a lot of good stuff there.
First and last, the podcast.
Up and running, 2 hours here, just underway. I am Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr. This is First and Last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Not quite ready to say I told you so, because we're still unproven here, but back when Eli Manning did not start, it was against the Raiders. Geno Smith did. There was all this outrage by Giants fans. It's no way to treat a guy. Look what he's given to you. Blah, blah, blah. I just took it at face value. Many fans tried to explain to me that this made sort of Eli the fall guy of a team that only had 2 wins in, I don't know what it was, early December. And I didn't take it as that. I knew they had a bunch of injuries, whether it be Beckham and everyone else. This wasn't their season. Not that Eli was the greatest quarterback this year, but this was a move for the future. See what they got with Geno for maybe a game or whatever, and then really figure out what you got with the rookie Davis Webb. And that's where we're taking this now, because what happened was McAdoo gets fired, Eli back in starting, and now the Giants are in disarray in terms of just confusion. And the whole point of this is to figure out what you have with Davis Webb. Get him first-team reps, get him in real-life games, not just a couple preseason snaps, so you know what you have because, oh, by the way, you're going to have probably the number 2 overall pick with all these QBs coming out, likely Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, a couple other guys. Who knows? Baker Mayfield. So you have all these options, but you need to know what you have. You can't just take the next guy because Davis Webb's only 1 year into the NFL. In a recent article in the New York Post, some defensive players who face Davis Webb and obviously see him at practice had some quotes about the potential of drafting a franchise quarterback. Don't draft him. Don't do it. Davis is going to be really good in this league when it's his time, I promise you. That quote courtesy of Landon Collins. Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. Why wouldn't you want the second pick of the draft to be a quarterback? He was asked that. He said, I've seen him drop it in the bucket, which is like a perfect throw in the bucket, talking about Davis Webb. I've seen things that he's done. So you have defensive players that are impressed. You have a guy who's young, all the measurables, blah, blah, blah. Figure out what you have with him, like Ben McAdoo tried to do 3 weeks ago, instead of a stupid consecutive start streak that was not like 1 or 2 away from the record. And it's not like you can move him over to third like you could Ripken. You had no other option. That's the fact of the situation with the Giants with 2 wins. And now they don't know what they have, and they still screwed up the whole thing with Eli and Geno. So they completely botched this situation. So now they have a young quarterback who could be really good. And then they have the number 2 overall pick who they might have some FOMO with and still have to take a guy like Darnold or Rosen. Let us know your thoughts. Reach out to us, 1-800-Flowers.com, Twitter feed, at ESPN Radio, at Doug ESPN, or call us, 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Producer Devin, you're a Giants fan. Take me back to when you saw that Eli was being benched. Were you part of the outrage?
I was initially, just because of all he's done. But then, like you said, I started coming around to the fact that if people are just outraged about the streak, he's not going to reach his brother.
So I'm sorry, all he's done, was he working for free?
He was definitely not working for free.
Okay, so he was like one of the highest paid quarterbacks, made a couple $100 million.
In fact, I just read he just bought all of his offensive linemen like $10,000 duffel bags. So yeah, he's not hurting.
So there was an exchange of money for services, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what am I missing? That he's not allowed to have a different role in the company?
No, I just think some players have certain statures where they've earned the benefit of the doubt, I guess.
So you should mortgage the future of the company to reward one employee.
I'm not saying it's smart.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm obviously being like combative with you just to kind of prove a point. That's what I didn't get. And I was consistent. I've said that at the very time. Like, you are, and then in this article by the Post, Steve Spagnuolo says, we are focused on winning the football game. And to me, winning the football games with Eli Manning. You should be focused on winning the football game in the future. Because winning a couple more games this year is actually bad for you because of the whole tanking thing. But I'll respect you as a coach if you don't want to tank. That's fine. But you got to be focused on the future and know what you have. In fact, Spags, maybe Davis Webb can be really good, and then you can flip him for like an O-tackle and protect your franchise quarterback, Eli Manning. I mean, there's so many other things you can do. It just doesn't line up to logic. And to your point, Devin, when you said it's emotional. And I took it at face value in a vacuum. Eli was not the fall guy. I didn't care about the consecutive streak thing, the starts. And I just don't understand that outrage. Like when all the arguments that people were presenting in favor of Eli, like he's done things the right way, he's been a solid guy, blah, blah, all that stuff's awesome. And that's why he's been around forever. And that's why he should get a statue and his name in the Ring of Honor. That's all good. But when you have a salary cap era and you have a limit to your roster and you can't just, like, you have to develop other guys and move on. And frankly, Eli's not that good. He had a couple nice Super Bowl runs, never won a playoff game outside the 2 runs he had to win the Super Bowl, never won a single playoff game outside of those 2 years. He was never a good fantasy quarterback. In some leagues, he was undrafted. But whatever. Like, he's your franchise guy. He's got you there. But you don't owe him. Like, I'm a Laker fan. I saw them let Kobe hijack the franchise for a couple years. It was a complete disaster. You don't owe these guys anything. That's why you paid them hundreds of millions of dollars. So when you have a chance to develop a quarterback, figure out what you have, when you're going to have a top 5 pick, in this case, likely number 2, you're getting the worst of both ends.
I think that's the other thing that made me upset is that they went to Geno Smith instead of Davis Webb. I wouldn't have minded as much if they went to the young guy that's unproven.
Okay, fair point. The plan wasn't to have Geno all 5 weeks or whatever games. Second, Geno was bad with what franchise?
The Jets.
Okay, so we don't know for sure if he's definitely that bad. Do I think he's a starting quarterback in the NFL? Absolutely not. Do I think he could be a backup? Maybe the Giants are trying to figure out if he's a good enough backup for next year for Davis Webb, or maybe the number 2 overall pick that they plan to start right away, and they ship Eli to good old Tom Coughlin in Jacksonville. Like, I just think there's a method to the madness to a certain extent, and maybe Mara's trying to take the temperature and do all that and let Ben McAdoo be the fall guy. But my point is this. When there are NFL guys, defensive players, who face Davis Webb, a rookie, in practice every day and say he's the future, he's going to be our quarterback down the road, then maybe you should figure that out in actual games and validate it when you have a pick as high as like number 2 the coming year. ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Now you can test drive Snapshot to see how much you can save before switching to Progressive. Visit progressive.com/snapshot. Snapshot. I am Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr. This is First and Last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Don't forget, all guests join us via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. We're going to go out to Las Vegas in a little bit and visit with Scott Spreitzer. He's going to join us via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line as well. And we're going to talk some of the games coming up, a couple bowl games. He likes a game on the Sunday card as well. And really, how is the Vegas public beating down the sports books, at least for the short term? It's good to see the public winning a little bit. But I didn't think this outrage, I'd get to revisit this with Eli Manning. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I got to do that because I didn't understand at the time. I understand the Geno outrage, and if they had gone straight to the rookie, but what if the rookie just wasn't ready, Devin? Like maybe needed another week of number 2 reps.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess what you would have to find out. You know what I mean? But
did the franchise benefit from having Eli start the last 2 weeks?
No, they lost.
So why the outrage?
I think it's just the cachet. You know, he's built up. Like you said, it's an emotional reaction.
It's emotion, and that's fine. Fan is short for fanatical. I respect that. And sports are about emotion. I'm okay with that. I mean, look, the emotion pays the bills, whether it be the viewership, the tickets in the stands, the parking, all the souvenirs. Like, it is emotion. I get it. That's awesome. But at some point, you have to, just have cooler heads prevail. My 2 cents.
First and Last, the podcast.
Hall of Fame broadcaster, a legend in the industry, Dick Enberg, died earlier tonight at the age of 82 in Southern California. His family did not 100% specify exactly the cause of death, but they believe it was a heart attack. And San Diego Padres issued a statement. Part of it read, Dick was an institution in the industry for 60 years. He certainly was. I am a Los Angeles native, and I certainly remember him growing up in that area, whether it be UCLA, Rams, Angels, whatever it may be. And then obviously on network radio, as he called, 28 Wimbledons, 10 Super Bowls, and 8 championship games in NCAA men's hoops, including that big showdown in 1979, Indiana State, Michigan State, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson. I am Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr. This is First and Last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Earlier tonight, ESPN LA radio host and also Lakers play-by-play man on the radio airwaves and guy who went to UCLA, certainly understands the significance of Dick Enberg, joined ESPN Radio earlier tonight and spoke about what made Dick Enberg so good.
Natural enthusiasm. He had that gift of when you were listening to him, you thought there was no place else he'd rather be than where he was. And so when you were listening to a game, you could tell just by the sound of his voice that was the place to be. And you wanted to be at those games, and you know, I think that's what elevated him to the top of NBC. You know, Dick, I think, called 6 Super Bowls. He became the voice of tennis on both NBC and CBS. He called Olympics. I mean, he had that thing that only a handful of guys ever have. Chick Hearn, who was the legendary Laker announcer long before I was, had this too, that they just sounded so genuinely excited to be there that you thought, wow, that's where I want to be and that's what I want to do. And he just gave that to everybody.
Dick Enberg, a true Hall of Famer, dead at the age of 82. I'm Doug Kezirian, Filling in for Mike Golic Jr. on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. This is First and Last. By the way, that was John Ireland, a voice for ESPN Radio in Los Angeles. So we're going to make a hard left turn and talk about some sports, but for more coverage of that, check out ESPN.com and also SportsCenter throughout the morning. We will have many tributes to that legendary broadcaster, Dick Enberg. But right now I want to talk NFL. I was thinking about this, and we hear about these things, and it first came about a couple weeks ago in that Snow Bowl game in Buffalo. Remember, it was the Colts and Bills, and it was just awesome. Just all that snow, and went to overtime, and LaShawn McCoy scored the game-winning touchdown. It was just so awesome to see. But earlier in the game, there was a missed field goal by Adam Vinatieri, and there was all this reaction like, oh, he has a player incentive bonus to be 90% or higher on his field goal attempts, and he gets a giant chunk of change, and I believe it's like $500,000. So he's got to make up for that miss because he missed. And, this is not $25,000 bonuses for making an all-star team like we see in some sports and $10,000 for this or whatever. This is serious coin. Julius Peppers makes $1 million this year. If he reaches a certain sack threshold, he makes $750,000. So that's almost double his salary. So there's some legit incentives in these contracts, and I just don't think they should exist at all. I think there should be a cap on them because at some point you're going to get players worried about money instead of the overall benefit of the team. Now, I understand that these incentives are lined up with in theory, the spirit of helping the team. I get that. But that's not always the case. If you have a D lineman who wants to make another half sack to get his $500,000 bonus, well, maybe his assignment is to stretch out and, stunt, run block, or whatever it may be. And not that he's going to totally defy the coach, but he might. What's going to stop him? Or how about this? Let's just say it's not even part of defying the coach. Let's just say it's a garbage Week 17 game, and neither team's in the playoff hunt. Coach probably wants him to go make the money. Who cares? I just think it gets a little unprofessional, I think is the right word. And we see it in the NBA. If you think I'm crazy, we actually see it in the NBA. Do you realize how many players at the end of the first, second, or third, especially in a blowout, but let's just say in a tight game, that, let's say there's a shot and goes in with like 2 seconds left, and then they inbound it, and a guy's going to chuck a shot from three-quarter court. You know how many guys wait and perfectly sink it so it's after the buzzer they release the ball so it doesn't affect their shooting percentage? That's just their stats. Forget the player incentives. So if they're doing that, what if I'm maybe not Adam Vinatieri and I haven't made millions over the years and have a Hall of Fame career as a kicker? What if I'm like year 4 and I need to make money and I have a $500,000 bonus on maybe if I'm a year 4 kicker, maybe not that, $250 on a certain percentage of field goals? And what if the coach comes over and says, hey, we got a 57-yarder. How bad's the win? Can you make it? Coach, I don't know. Let's play field. I can't guarantee you I make it. I mean, we got Darryl Strawberry talking about having sex in between innings with TMZ. You're thinking if that's happening at some point in a professional athlete's career, then I don't think it's that crazy. What if Gronk in the huddle? Gronk can get $2 million. Gronk can get $2 million if he reaches 80 catches or 1,200 yards or 90% of playing time, I believe it is. And if not, it's a reach all pro. Whatever it is. Like, what if Gronk's like, hey, Tommy, throw me the ball here. I need 2 more catches. Brady's going to keep his tight end happy. Why wouldn't he? I want to hear your thoughts. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. You can also reach out on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed at ESPN Radio or myself directly at Doug ESPN. And if you think I'm nuts, I want to think of it, and this is what I want your thoughts on the Twitter feed or the 888-SAY-ESPN. Give me an example in your workplace where you think there's a symmetry here. There's apples to apples. Like, for example, what if my job and my bonuses were based on ratings? Okay? What if I said and just ridiculous comments like Steph Curry was a bad shooter and he's only making shots. He's just getting lucky and, he's just wide open because Klay Thompson gets him all the looks. Or actually, let's rephrase it. Let's just say Klay Thompson's not that good. He's just benefiting from Durant and Steph Curry, and he's got open looks all the time. Yeah, he can shoot, but he can't do anything else. He shouldn't be an all-star. And all this stuff, maybe that's not that outrageous, but maybe I take it a step further. Like he's a role player, he's a bench player, he's just benefiting from being with all those guys like Draymond Green and stuff.
First and last, the podcast.
Wrapping things up here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Don't forget, ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. And if you're short on time and searching for the perfect present, 1-800-Flowers.com is your answer. When you order the beautifully crafted holiday flower tree, you'll get 20% off. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. So the beauty of working at ESPN is there's a lot of good stuff out there, and we have a lot of good guests coming up on Golic and Wingo. Woj, Damian Woody, those are our own analysts. Calais Campbell of the Jags joining Trey and Mike, and then Field Yates. So we have a lot of good guests all around. Yesterday, on the penultimate Ryan Russillo show, Daryl Morey, the Rockets general manager, joined him and Adnan Virk, just discussing various things, sort of what went right. What was the thought process ahead of agreeing to bring on Chris Paul? Remember the critics out there saying that how can 2 point guards get along with CP3 and also James Harden? So he took us behind the curtain a little bit there. And then also in general, just like, what's the mindset of the Rockets given that the Warriors have been so dominant, they're overwhelming favorites? Here's the Rockets GM, Daryl Morey, yesterday on the Ryan Russillo show.
It's the only thing we think about. I think I'm not supposed to say that, but we're basically obsessed with how do we beat the Warriors, and we know that it's like we calculated it's like 90% if we're going to win a title, we've got to obviously beat the Warriors at some point, and so we're extremely focused on that, and a lot of our signings and what we do during the year is based on that. What is the point of this league except winning a title? So we'd love to get the 1 seed. We'd love to win more games than any in Rockets history, which is 58. Those are all nice things, but, frankly, we spend most of our time just figuring out how we might be able to knock the Warriors off in 7 games, and because we're pretty sure that's going to be what defines our season.
It's Rockets general manager Daryl Morey talking about the mindset of the Rockets and how the focus is on the Warriors. I just love how he said, we ran all the algorithms, it's 90% that we'd have to face them and beat them in a 7-game series. That MIT background of his just, not just sort of the, you got to beat the Warriors, actually simulated and realized and calculated that it is 90%, all things considered going into the season. So, look, the Warriors have redefined the NBA, and everyone's trying to catch them. And some teams are just like, let's punt on the next 4 or 5 years because we're not going to beat them at their game. And what often gets overlooked, not by super diehards of the NBA, but by casual sports fans, is you can try to copy them with the chucking and ducking on offense like the Rockets are doing, but it's the defense that also separates the Warriors. They're one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. They can switch every pick, and that's what makes them so special, is you rarely get an advantage when you have them in, big versus small or whatever. They just know how to do it, their length, and then they go to that lineup of depth. It's offensively very difficult to defend, but honestly, that's their strength on defense as well, is their ability to handle that. So Rockets chucking 43s a game. It's impressive, but out in Las Vegas, it's the Warriors versus the Field. Warriors at the Westgate Las Vegas Superbook, minus 180. So still a huge favorite there. I'm Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr. This is First and Last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We are presented by Progressive Insurance. So Daryl Morey yesterday, very rare, candid moment. Now, we were told in Sports Center meetings over the years, you can't use the words like honesty, candor, because you don't really know what's going on in their heads. It's really Daryl Morey said this, but you can't say he was very open and honest because you don't know what's going on. It's like, I remember it was the night Lance Armstrong spoke to Oprah and came clean. Well, we don't know if he's coming clean. He just says he admits PED use. You assume that's the truth, but you don't really know. So I want to say candor, but that is pretty cool that Daryl Morey conceded that that they were focused on the Warriors in that regard. And it's all about the Warriors because they've obviously seemingly going to go to the finals every year for about a decade stretch. So that was on the Ryan Russillo Show, which today, if you haven't heard, is the final show for Russillo. He's going to be doing a podcast moving forward and likely relocating to Southern California. Go check out his podcast and his show later today, 1 to 4 Eastern, and can expand more on that. And what's been said, obviously, by all these people coming in, chiming in. I mean, Mike Tirico was on. Scott Van Pelt's coming up later, his past co-host, Stanford Steve, who they worked together a bunch, not just on the SVP and Russillo Show, but also on College Game Day Radio, which I've hosted and had a chance to have Ryan come on. And I just want to, anytime something like this happens, I always try to think of something different because I obviously agree with what everyone said, that Ryan is super talented and super hard worker and does his homework, puts in the hours and hours and pretty much more than anyone in this biz. But while that's been said, I think, he has this curmudgeon sort of approach that they talked about on the show yesterday that Van Pelt named it business furious, that it's what his natural resting is just sort of disgruntled. He's actually a really nice guy, and I just want everyone to realize how generous he's been with his time. I had to host a bunch of midnight shows after NBA Finals games, and he made a point of coming in and helping, and I just started, and he's like, look, I know what it's like. It's so hard to get people on the phone at these hours, so he was just really generous with his time and always supportive, and I've had the good fortune to fill in on the show just a couple of times and got to co-host with him a few times as well and do some NBA Tonights, things like that. So really appreciative of all the help he's given me, and then just in general as a listener, and I'll continue to listen to his podcast and will be a loyal follower in that regard. So wishing him and sharing everyone else's thoughts on wishing him the best of luck as he moves and turns the page a little bit on his career and the next chapter moving forward. I'm Doug Kezirian, filling in for Mike Golic Jr. on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. This is First and Last. Coming up, Golic and Wingo wrap up the week. Field Yates going to join them, talk all things NFL, maybe even some fantasy advice like Hembo was just nice enough to share here. Woj, Adrian Wojnarowski, had a big story on refereeing. Now, there's a rift between NBA officials and NBA stars. Kevin Durant's already been ejected 3 times. LeBron has been tossed this season for the first time in his career. That there's been a short fuse by both players and also referees. So Woj is going to expand on that. What's next for these two sides as they try to figure things out? By the way, I'm getting some tweets out there I talked about how the ridiculous nature of player incentives and these large bonuses and how it's risky for franchises to do that. I think it's a really bad idea. And someone reminded me, Zach out there tweeting, watch the movie Any Given Sunday. Perfect example of how incentives can affect a player via their health or selfish play. Great movie, by the way. That's what he said. I'll disagree on the great movie part, but it's a great point. It's just not the wisest idea. I'll just leave it at that. I already got into it in the last block, but something to keep in mind. I just think the incentives are way too high. If you want to do small incentives, that's fine, but it could lead to some bad situations.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.